I don't know. You can. Okay, so start again. I'm Richard Penny from Statistics New Zealand. Brian Monsell had the idea for this roundtable discussion because this is the way that we're moving. We wanted to put it in the Seasonal Adjustment Practitioners Workshop. If you don't know about that, get in touch with Kathy. She can tell you about the Seasonal Adjustment Practitioners Workshops and make sure that you're aware of the next one. But to allow more time for discussion points, because there's a lot here to discuss, as we found in our planning for this, we've turned it into a standalone session. So you've got training and seasonal adjustment. It's used a lot. Could I also just ask everybody to just check that you are muted if you're not one of the speakers? And it's probably a good idea if you get rid of the video, because some people have been finding there are problems with bandwidths if there are a lot of images appearing. Just, be polite, I suppose, is the easiest thing. So training and seasonal adjustment, there's lots of bits to it. There's the concept, the statistical methods, how you use the software, and how you use your own particular kind of software. So the thing is, of course, we were moving towards providing training using virtual means anyway, but of course, COVID has pushed that faster forward. And Statistics New Zealand, because we have seasonal adjustment practitioners in different cities, we've had to work on that, and there are problems there. So with the pandemic, COVID, switched to all virtual approaches. So we're here to discuss the goals of our training, where each of the panelists are in the process of creating new training materials, the challenges we faced along the way, and what has worked well and what hasn't worked well, and what we are still trying to get to work well. Our panelists in alphabetical order, and I'm just going to do it in speaking order. It's Bill Bell, Elijah Hood, Bill Bell from the US Census Bureau, Elijah Hood from Catherine Hood Consulting. The Catherine Hood's name should be familiar to those who've worked in seasonal adjustment. Kathy McDonald Johnson from the US Census Bureau, who again should be a familiar name to any of you who've worked in seasonal adjustment. Brian Monsell from NRS Solutions, but he's currently on contract to the Bureau of Labour Statistics, again, another familiar name. Daniel Olek from the Deutsches Bundesbank, again, another familiar name. And we also were hoping that Merve Gürkin from the Turkish Statistical Institute would bring her views and her knowledge on this, but unfortunately she's had to back out at the last minute. It's a bit sad. I'd like to start off by having a very strong thank to Wendy Martinez from the Census Bureau for her time and energy in setting up the meeting. For those of you who've ever done online meetings, getting the software to work across a whole bunch of organizations, yeah, let's not talk about it. So we have developed questions or topics to cover over the course of the discussions, and I am effectively facilitating, guiding us through those topics. We ask that those of you who are not panelists, you remain, and the panelists, if they're not speaking, remain muted, probably best off camera, except the panelists. Now, the way it's going to work is if you've got questions, will you put them in the Zoom chat feature? I will be monitoring that. And if I feel that the question needs to be addressed at that particular time, I will ask it then. But generally, I will just keep all the questions until the end. What I may do too is with some of the questions, because it looks to be a bit complicated or it's a bit more back and forth, I may actually call upon you to unmute yourself and ask the questions directly. Also, a reminder that you'll be talking about your particular aspects. Be careful, because we've had this problem at my organization, that sometimes you're talking about a problem you've had with this stuff. It may be, just remember, this is a public forum. It is being recorded, so just be careful that you don't raise any confidentiality or organizational issues. Obviously, be polite, no politics and everything. Basically just be kind and professional and civil. And again, just a reminder, you are being recorded. So that's more than enough from me. So I would like to now call upon Bill Bell to open the panel discussion. That's all yours, Bill. He was there, wasn't he?
I don't think I see him.
Oh, okay. I thought to. Okay, is Elijah there now?
Yes,
Okay, Elijah, are you ready to go?
I suppose. Where shall I start?
At the very beginning.
Okay. So this panel being on training, specifically virtual training, exclusively online classes has been a dream for Catherine Hood Consulting since we started the company in 2006. We really started working in earnest on it in 2017. We're trying to build professional grade online training for X13 ARIMA seats that clients anywhere can purchase and learn at their own pace. We are trying to create a software kind of like product where you go through slides with audio and they at your own pace kind of learn, and there's at the end of each section a little quiz where you can test your own skills and see where your knowledge has fallen with the information, and then you can go back or you can continue on. And then we're hoping for the completed courses to have sort of a workshop kind of like session that we can do with clients where we bring data and they bring data and we sort of both work the data together in X13 and compare results, and they can judge then based on the results we got and the results they got, and we can talk about it together about how well they think they've progressed in the course. And that's been our plan and our dream with online training. And really the only thing that COVID did in 2020 was give us more time to work on it. It didn't really change any of our plans.
Okay, yes, so I'm going to keep myself, you don't need to see me. I see that we've got Bill. Just a reminder to the panelists, at the end of going through, I'll just go quickly through, say, is there anything else that you wish to add? So Bill, are you now with us? I thought I saw his name appear. Oh, perhaps I...
Yeah, he is on there.
Actually, might be having technology.
I can speak for the Census Bureau on.
Yeah, so Kathy, why don't you go next?
So pre-pandemic, we still had a lot of people who had started teleworking, but we were still limited to in-person classes. And right when the pandemic happened and we were sent home to telework, we did shortly after that teach a class. We essentially used our same materials that we had used for in-person classes, and we just did it remotely with people logging in and sharing screens. And that was pretty difficult because most people wanted to turn off their cameras. It was really hard to see if we had interaction with people. It would just, in person, you can kind of walk around a room and see how people are acclimating to the new information. So after that class, we decided that we would go in a different direction. So we would have materials that people could use and learn at their own pace. So we would do recordings of our materials. And we did make a lot of changes then. We shortened the sections of each class. We broke things down into smaller pieces. It took a lot of time and energy. We recorded not necessarily videos. It's a mix of videos and recorded narrations of the material. And so we've given that version of the class a couple times. What happens is the coordinators give people a couple weeks to complete the materials. And I think that has been a bit difficult because people don't understand it. It still is a very intensive, dense kind of class. And so they still need to devote that time to it. On top of that, because we're going through the coordinators, they require that we have a final exam with this class. And what we've done is, since we're not doing this in person, we have had office hours. And we've done this a couple times. We've learned a little bit each time. And it does seem like we need a little bit more interaction. So the office hours are, of course, voluntary. They're optional for the class participants. We want to keep that optional, but what we are thinking is that we could have a specific topic set aside for our office hours, and that might make it, that might bring about more interaction, and that might help with people. I mean, it's just when you're learning, it seems like interaction, it's all about communication, right? So, I mean, that's the line that we're going down at this point.
Okay, Bill's having some problems with his mic, so I'll bring in Brian Monsell, if you want to give us your experiences with doing virtual training and seasonal adjustment.
All right, thank you. When I first started with BLS back in 2019, I was brought in as a rehired annuitant as I'd retired from the Census Bureau, and one of my major things on my brief was to do seasonal adjustment training. We did one session of in-class seasonal adjustment training in 2019, and then 3 months later, the pandemic hit. And so we had the same kind of thoughts as Kathy's group at Census did. We thought that we needed to do more training. We were bringing people in, but we couldn't teach the class the same way. The sessions were too long. We wanted to have an on-demand component as well as an in-person component. So the first thing I did was to redesign the existing course. We removed a lot of the online demonstrations demonstrating the software and concentrated on the basic material on seasonal adjustment, the technical material, tried to make that more accessible. Since we thought it would be impossible for people to stay focused with a 2-hour average runtime for some of these sessions, broke them down into smaller, more manageable sessions. I looked at some of the formation, some of the presentation of those sessions, and tried to add graphical elements, pictures, tried to simplify some of the presentation, did more work with flowcharts and things like that to make it look more visually engaging. And so we now have essentially recorded videos of basically having the slides and then narration over the slides, the updated slides. We also have been very careful about having text on the bottom of the screen to have so that the text would mirror what the person was saying. So we now have like 13 videos covering about the first half of our class. We're continuing to develop videos on that. We're also looking at creating sort of like online videos to show demonstrations of how to run particular software. And we're going to try something, we've done it once, we're going to try something that we're calling a curated session, where we simply run the video. We open a Teams meeting, run the video, and then someone looks at the video with you and is online, can answer questions via the chat. And then there's a discussion session afterwards where, we bring up set questions. I hope that people will feel good enough to be able to stop us during the middle of the session to say, hey, I have a question about this, and maybe we can stop the video and talk to people. We've developed quizzes and tests for each section of the videos, so that for each video we designed talks for each section so that we could sort of measure what people knew going into the session and hopefully what people know going out of the session and what they learned. So I'll stop at this point, but that's pretty much the efforts that we've gone on from this point.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So I'd like to now bring in Daniel Olbach, if he would like to give us his experiences.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. Yeah, so I work for the Deutsche Bundesbank, and before the pandemic, we've been giving courses basically all over the world, introductions to seasonal adjustment, advanced courses of about 3 to 5 days, which were quite intensive and always in person. Usually 2 people from the Deutsche Bundesbank would fly out to other parts of the world, to other central banks especially, or to colleagues here in Germany and other statistical institutions in Germany. And so we have a lot of experience in giving in-person seminars. But up until the pandemic, we basically had no experience in giving online seminars. And the pandemic forced us to change a lot in that regard and test out our abilities to give online courses. And as the other speakers already alluded to, one important thing is to keep students engaged. The underlying problem is that, well, with online courses, the attention span of the students tends to be smaller, which may seem like a trivial problem, but the ways in which you would kind of help students being engaged in on-site classes will be completely different than in online courses. I mean, you can switch around, you can show different materials, you can like bring people to stand up and sit down or whatever, start a discussion easily. And all of these things tend to be a little bit more complicated in online classes. And so the interactivity that we all like maybe has to be prepared a little bit better in online courses. You have to think about maybe including surveys, little quizzes, and other forms. You have to shorten the courses for sure. I mean, we tend to give courses where we have 6 to 8 hours of courses each day, and that in almost all cases we found was not really sensible for online training. So more than 4 hours tends to be, well, 4 hours tend to be more than enough. Then what, like the question then is, if you only have 4 hours instead of 8 hours, how to still get people to learn the same amount of stuff? And I'm sure we'll touch on that in the upcoming minutes. But one obvious solution might be homework, giving people homework. But well, what we found is that people in our classes, they didn't want to feel like they were going to school. So like in that sense, they didn't really like doing homework. But still, like that's a problem that kind of needs to be solved. And one solution is that if you do online courses, you just trim down the content that you're presenting, being smart about that. But also maybe because you have a little bit less interaction and questions, so on and so forth, naturally you can shorten stuff. And if you do what Brian Monsell is doing, like using pre-recorded stuff, then obviously you can think about more what you want to say, and then in that sense make what you present shorter and more concise. And we're trying to do stuff along those lines, though now, well, the pandemic is not over, but like restrictions have been lessened, and we really prefer on-site courses, and have started again giving courses in other parts of the world and are happy about that. But the mixture is great as well, because obviously online courses have a lot of advantages that we'll touch upon shortly. So that's it from me for the time being.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. I sort of thought that, Bill, that you've, yes, you switched to phone open. Okay, you can hear. Could, do you want to just give us a quick spiel, Bill, just to check that the audio is working?
Can you hear me?
Oh, yep, that's fine. Okay.
Okay.
Um,
Sorry, I had problems with both my phone and my Zoom connection. So
okay.
sorry about this.
That's all right. Okay, so look, that's the end of the direct stuff from the panelists. I don't see any questions in the chat, but as moderator, I'll start it off. Basically, my first question to all of the panelists, and you just come in as you see fit, which is, what do you think this virtual learning, what do you think its greatest potential is, in the sense that what it allows, in terms of it improves things compared to in person, and what thing are you going to miss out? Some of you have touched on that, but if you could just sort of quickly go through all of you, actually I'll just call on you. So Elijah, what do you think is the biggest advantage you get with virtual, and the biggest disadvantage of not having virtual?
I think one of the advantages we have, we used to do in-person classes at Catherine Hood Consulting, but we have found that for our model, since we are charging for our course, it was a little cost prohibitive to fly a person out to wherever you needed the course and have them teach the course. And it was a lot more cost effective for our customers to buy a course online. And so that's part of the reason why we decided to do it. And also, we are a 2-person team at Catherine Hood Consulting, and traveling is a lot of work. So it was sort of just like, if we put a lot of work in up front and get these courses, it'll be easier for us to teach more people. And that then makes it more accessible to a larger audience. It's not just like large institutions that have the finances to fly us in to teach the course. It's also smaller companies or just individuals who want to learn more. And that was the biggest draw for us, was that it was just way more accessible.
But what I also had the opposite question, but what is the drawbacks of a virtual compared to an in-person?
That is true. Most of the drawbacks that I have seen have been that we had a tried and true method for in-person courses, and like Catherine knew what she was doing when she was getting up in front of a group of people to teach, and you get that engagement, you get people to talk to. One of the big things that we noticed too, one of our pillars of in-person training was the people that we were training would bring in their data, and we would analyze it with them and kind of tailor the experience to them a little bit. And there's a little less opportunity for tailoring the experience to the people that we're teaching. They kind of have to, if they want that, bring that to the table themselves, in asking follow-up questions as they're doing the course. So it's just a little bit harder to personalize it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Kathy, your thing about what virtual allows you to do, and Wendy's asked the question, so I think this is things, I don't know whether this is generic, but how do you teach tools, concepts that require hands-on training? For example, giving projects, questions, etc., requiring the use of computational tools such as R packages. I think that's just sort of a supplementary question, so I'll just go through. Kathy, the advantages of virtual and what you gain doing virtual and what you lose doing virtual. You can just say the same as the previous speakers as well.
I hope I don't duplicate what others have said too much. Even pre-pandemic, a lot of people had started teleworking, not to the maximum amount, but I mean, just having remote training allows people to take that training when they aren't able to be in at work physically 5 days a week. And on top of that, I really do like the fact that although it took so much time and energy, I do like the fact that we have this set of learn at your own pace materials, because, some people are morning people, some people are afternoon people. There's that flexibility now that people can take the training when they feel like it and when they can fit it in. The disadvantages, as Eli was just saying, and even to a greater extent, sometimes people come into the class, they're not as technical, and we are giving them technical information and we're covering that. But if you're there in person, you can reassure the person that they don't need all that. If they don't need all that technical information, that what you do hope that they pull away from the class are these certain concepts. And so it's just, you can talk to people one-on-one. If they have a question, you can answer it right then. If you're giving them pre-recorded information, they can come to you later at office hour time or just contact you. But if it's in person, that's really nice that you can just kind of bake that into your conversations with the participants.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kathy. What about you, Brian? Have you got any extra thoughts about the advantages of going to virtual and some of the disadvantages?
Well, not to reflect, I agree with everything the other speakers have said. I would add that sometimes in trying to schedule an in-person class, you have to take into account the production schedules of all of the different, we have different groups that have different production schedules. Some people produce statistics at the end of the month. Some people produce it in the middle of the month. Some people have a 2-week production process. So it makes it difficult to try to schedule an in-person class when you have those types of logistical things, versus if you have an on-demand online class, those people can take those things at their they can take those things at their leisure when they're not actually have a time crunch or have to deal with a production schedule. They can work they can work separate from their production schedule and learn things they need to learn and then apply it to what they're doing in the production. I mean, as for disadvantages, I would hearken on what other people have said and just say that, the feedback you get is not as, you don't get the feedback that you get with actually being in a room with a bunch of people. You can get to read the room. You get to make, you can make like a game time decision as to, okay, I need to cover this a little bit more carefully because they don't seem, you can look at the crowd and see whether they're understanding a certain section or not, or you can go back the next day and say, okay, I know I talked about this yesterday, but let's go over it a little bit. And here's an example. You can make calls like that based on your experience and your intuition that are not always possible when you've got a preset bunch of videos sitting somewhere that you're going through, which is why I thought it was important to have something like the curated sessions where you have something where people can ask questions and you have that, you can try and generate that type of interaction.
Okay, Daniel, is there anything you wish to add?
So a seasonal adjustment for official statistics is, I think, a little bit different from just applying a statistical method to data one time and then that's it. Because I think often it's about experience. And one thing that we as lecturers can give is sharing our experience. And of course, this part often needs to be tailor-made to the audience because it depends on what they already knew beforehand and so on and so forth. I mean, you can easily learn about ARIMA models, for example, by reading it about it. But then if you're dealing with time series on a month-to-month basis, for example, then you get a feel for different stuff that maybe is not directly put into books. Just trivially, for example, I think the airline model is quite a good model, and very often in our month-to-month work, we see that if the automatic models find a very complicated ARIMA model, say a 413 and something seasonal ARIMA model, then in our experience, we know, well, the diagnostics may be saying that this kind of model makes sense, but economic intuition, but also practical experience tells us, well, a model that complicated usually points to some problems in the time series. And of course, you can incorporate stuff like that in your pre-recorded lectures, or you can, of course, talk about it in online classes. But this kind of stuff will come up in discussions with the audience when you talk about their time series and so on. And I think this is something that really is an advantage of on-site training. But on the other hand, you can reach, as Elijah has said, way more people, way more or cheaper. With online classes, you don't need to fly out. You can easily scale your class to include tens or hundreds of people, especially if you're giving lectures, as opposed to, say, like seminars where you use the software. And maybe counterintuitively, I would say that computer courses are better given not online, but on site. Because what Brian also said, you get a feel for the room and you more easily notice if what you're telling the people gets understood or not, or maybe if they're just doing something wrong, or maybe if they are just clicking one wrong button. Then on site, you'll see that quickly, you fix the problem quickly, and then that's it. But with online, you to maybe share the screen or get to a separate online room to talk to the people, to the person individually, and so on and so forth. So this is why sometimes with this, if you teach computational tools, it is easier to do it on site. Interestingly, I found.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. Now we have a question from Chuck Coleman, and I think rather than me reading it out, because there's quite a lot in there. Chuck, can you unmute yourself and ask the question directly? Because I think we're going to have a bit of back and forth with the Q&A.
Okay. My question really speaks to the different types of learners. Now, I know a lot of people come into seasonal adjustment and not knowing anything about time series or anything, and you're just trying to get them up to speed to understand the software. But there are other learners who want to start with the theory, knowing the model and what the software is trying to do, and so I'm interested in knowing what accommodations are made for these different learning styles. Like, are there modules for people who want to know the theory of seasonal adjustment before plunging into the practice, and say want to know the meanings and derivations of the diagnostics without just as a separate module?
So I'd just leave it open. Panelists, just unmute yourself and start discussing it.
I think Bill's raising his hand, but I'll start. I mean, I would say that the first thing we have to do is I think you have to get the most basic training out at first, and then you look at what the needs are for the folks, and then you develop special classes or special stuff based on that. I know that at Census, Kathy's group had the basic training, and then the basic training would then go deeper and deeper into things like the diagnostics. And then Tucker McElroy taught a class that was more theoretical and basis, talked about model-based seasonal adjustment and talked about the models. I'm not sure if Tucker has plans to bring his, to redo his class, but I mean, I think that's the kind of thing that I would probably do, is I would first get the basic training set up for the basic, and then look at what the needs are and create other special training based on that.
Let me just say one thing. I was teaching seasonal adjustment to someone who really needed the theory first and just didn't understand the basic training, is to him it was just not twiddling knobs instead of actually some kind of, he was using means without knowing the end, and it didn't make sense to him.
Yep. Different learning styles, which is interesting. So Bill Bell, you had your hand up. So if you go and mute yourself and make your comments. Is he still there?
He might need to double unmute himself.
Yeah. Oh, well, let's know. So anybody else want to comment? Probably the easiest thing to do is just put up your hand and I'll call on you.
Oh, now I've got it.
Okay. Bill?
Yeah, sorry. Wendy was exactly right. I got to unmute my phone as well. Anyway, there was something I was going to say about the previous discussion, but on Chuck's question, of course, you've got that issue with any kind of training you do. It's just a matter of degree. But it is interesting when you're mixing in theory and teaching people how to learn computer software. And that gets into the logistics that are different between virtual and in person, which is what I was going to comment on. And I thought Brian's point was interesting there, because having pre-recorded courses has it's sort of the extreme, the advantage where people can do it according to their schedule, but it's the least amount of interaction, of course. And the other extreme is the all in-person training, where you can provide feedback and show attendees, how to run the software if they have trouble, which, we used to always do this in a room with people on computers that weren't their own. And there would always be people struggling with something with the software. And so you could go around, and ideally with two people, and find out what their problem was and help them get through it. An issue we had then was it limited the attendance, because it was limited by the number of computers that we had. But anyway, there's sort of, I think, the two extremes on the logistics there, the in-person, what Brian mentioned. And then that's when you're doing both some theory and some software training, then the logistics advantages and disadvantages are different for those two. And the other thing that occurred to me is, there's sort of a similar issue with conferences, virtual versus in-person attendance, and where that's going to settle out. We can all speculate on. I don't know, but I think with training, when you're instructing on software, that changes the advantages and disadvantages a bit from conferences.
Mm-hmm. I see, Eli, you've got your hand up. So if you want to unmute yourself and do your comments.
Yes. As for the question about kind of balancing seasonal adjustment theory and like the practical side of running the software, we definitely do try to create our courses with a balance of that. Obviously, we focus on the practical. We want to get people up and running, but we do try to include enough theory, because we can't, we can't tailor an online course to specific protocols of an organization or anything. We don't want to teach people step-by-step instructions. This is how to do it in the circumstance that we have here. We want to teach them a little bit of the theory behind it, because we do want our courses to have the theory that will help them understand where they're going with this. Partly because it is self-paced, and partly because it is something that we want to be available to a wider audience. And some of the like denser theoretical topics, we kind of like, there's more information on this, and we are going to, when we have the course completed, add like addendum appendix modules at the end that are like, refer to Appendix B module if you want to know more about this specific like theoretical concept, but it would be like optional in case the student buys the course and they don't really have a big background in statistics or mathematics, and they don't really, like if we just threw a bunch of theory at them, they would be overwhelmed. So we wanted to make that like heavy theory optional for people who needed it, whereas like a little bit of light theory for people who want to understand, why do I click this button? Why do I have this diagnostic? It's still there in the course.
Mm-hmm. Okay, any of the other panelists want to comment on that particular thing? Okay, I'll ask a question here too, which is, it has sort of been touched upon, is, well, actually, Shelley Smith has just actually asked the question that I was just about to ask, is how do you measure the success? Because even though you're not flying somebody, you're still getting somebody, giving a person, if I'm a manager, I'm giving the person time to do this stuff. So how do I know that it's worked? It's a question of, if you do the virtual training, that it's a time slot, just like in-person training, or like Brian was saying, you've got these modules and people do them on their own time. So I think, Shelley, why don't you sort of lead the discussion on how do you actually get people to do the work and the success of the work? So if you want to just unmute yourself, and you can do the back and forth and query the panelists. Shelley, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm just two mutes. Is my audio good?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm just, so I'm with the Bureau of Economic Analysis. If you don't know me, I know many of the panelists. I've interacted with you. I'm curious to know just how you assess whether your training's successful, and what the metrics are and how that's changed. From my perspective, a training is successful if I feel the analysts here at the BEA can take this and run with it and are more empowered to make decisions about their own data series. So I'm wondering if you can speak to how you would assess the effectiveness of your trainings, and whether you've seen a shift in that as your format and the way you present the information has had to evolve.
I think it's a good question, and I'd actually like to go through all of the panelists now. So Daniel, I see you've unmuted yourself, so you comment first.
Yeah, just a brief question, because what we're doing is we're giving out surveys directly after the course, so to evaluate basically how satisfied the participants were with the course. But obviously this is not, it's probably correlated, but it's not like really giving us the answer of how well did the course prepare the participants for conducting seasonal adjustment in the next weeks and months. We are always open for like questions or getting back together with participants to talk about time series problem that they're having, because often they'll notice a couple of weeks or a month later that they thought they understood something and they didn't, or more importantly, maybe they're facing a very, very unforeseeable problem, and they just want our input on what we would do in those settings. And I mean, we don't evaluate that, but in some ways, maybe the fewer questions you get, the more well prepared the participants were to handle the problems, or they're just scared to ask you. And then, so that's hard to evaluate. Ideally, we would do the surveys 1 year later, also to ask them, how well do you think you're doing with seasonal adjustment? But that's not something we're doing right now. So yeah, that's what we're doing.
Kathy, I'll call on you to give your observations on that question.
Well, one thing is that I alluded to, we do have a required final exam for the class participants, I don't know that that entirely gets at whether the class was successful, but at least it does take the participants through some steps that they, so that they have to apply what we've presented in the class. I think it comes down to whether or not they can review a bunch of time series and decide between seasonal adjustments. And I think this is a very tough question. This is something that we talked about when we were preparing, and I don't know that we at the Census Bureau have the optimum answer. It's just, as Daniel was saying, you make sure that you're available, you make sure that the participants have the information and that they can contact you, and then you're there to provide extra help if needed afterwards.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to next call on Eli, because of course he's got a different environment where quite often some of the people attending his courses are just the only person doing seasonal adjustment, where if we're in a big organization, we can generally work out somebody hasn't picked it up because we the experience. So Eli, your observations about how you can ensure, yeah,
how we measure success, that question. Yes. So we yes, we usually have one person at a time, or we oftentimes will have one person at a time buying the course and doing it themselves. So they don't have a lot of like feedback from classmates or anything. And they're just learning it on their own. But we do have a course evaluation form that we send out, where after they're done, they grade us on our content. And we use that to not only improve the course, but also sort of address questions that they've had, kind of like, if you didn't understand a specific concept, we can maybe talk over it with you after you've completed the course. And so, and I also liked what Daniel said about how if you don't hear questions back, then it's highly possible that they did understand. Like, they understood, they don't have a lot of questions, that's good. Or when you do hear the questions back, the questions are like pointed and direct at something specific that they want to like a special case. They're like, but what about this? And that's really encouraging to hear too, because it does mean that they're understanding the course content and they took the time to go through the course and they did the evaluation and they have good pointed questions. And so that's usually how we essentially keep track of ourselves and keep improving our course.
Okay, thank you. Brian, do you want to add anything to the discussion?
I would say that what we've set up for right now is I've developed quizzes, both pre and post quizzes for each of the videos that we have. And we've been able to attach them to the video in such a way that when the person starts to run the video within our Teams group, our team session, they get a link that says, here's the link to the pre-test. And when it goes to the end, they can take the post quiz. So we can look at how they performed, what they knew before they took the video and whether they learned anything after. Whether that's an effective way of determining whether your course was successful, I think we need to develop, we're going to get more experience as we get along through this process. And hopefully by doing the curated sessions where we're actually talking to the people, we can get a sense of what else we may need to do in the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. There's a big strand in the chat about the GPTs and the large language models and that sort of thing, which sort of you wonder whether we're going to still be necessary to train because people could just ask. But I'm going to ask a slightly different, completely different question. When you're working on producing a virtual thing, there is two ways you can do it. You can pre-record everything, which means you don't have an audience, or else you could record it with an audience. What do you think are the advantages and disadvantages with just doing a separate it's like modules or something like that, where you just do it and you organize it and what's involved, compared to if you decide that you're going to just doing that module with an audience, is that going to have advantages or disadvantages? Does anybody want to comment on that? Just a bit of a background. I do teaching, and I do the lectures, of which about a third of the students turn up to, because they're all recorded. And I've had to, with COVID, I had to actually also do the lectures without the audience. And I found it's really a lot harder if you haven't got people. And as a couple of you have commented, one of the advantages is if you do it in person, you can see the faces and the body structure, and that they're looking at their cell phone. So what do you think you have to allow for if you're to make everything work successfully in terms of building products? Because one of the things that we're trying to do with the virtual is that we build a lot of products that are reusable. So what do you think in terms of what you have to think about in building reusable products to use in virtual training? Anybody?
I'll jump in and draw on something that Daniel actually brought up, is that one advantage to recording a live class is, of course, that you get at least some interaction. But the advantage that I found when we pre-recorded things, and Daniel mentioned this, that you can be more concise, you can cover that topic in depth. And so I think there are advantages, because the live class, you get some interaction. You might not be covering the things that your future audience is going to need covered, but at least you have some back and forth with the material. If you record things to make that pre-recorded file available to people, you can have that script already. You just kind of go through it. It's very concise. People can return to it over and over to pick up on pieces that they didn't get the very first time around.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
I'll jump in and sort of continue on what Kathy was saying. I find when I do the pre-recorded sessions, it's like I have a script in front of me, so I can really work on, I can make sure that I'm gonna hit every single point, and it allows for everyone to have the same experience. If you're doing a recorded session, one audience may have different set of questions than another audience. And if you're just stopping at, okay, I'm gonna do this class as if it's a seminar and then just record the questions that I have. Well, the next audience that encounters that tape, they're gonna have different questions than the audience that was there before. So I think that's the disadvantage, is that, you may not be serving a future audience. So then what do? Are you gonna record every single session that you do, so that the person that's encountering this session is going to see, going to encounter the questions that they have? I think it's good to have like sort of a basis that's constant, and then people can react off of that, versus something where you might be led by the audience to cover different things in a different way than you. I think that can be a disadvantage if all of a sudden the needs of the next audience that sees that video changes.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else want to chip in?
I will. Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are. We can hear you, Bill.
Yeah, okay. So I was thinking one implication of doing virtual is, or pre-recorded, is I think you probably have to break the training into chunks, small chunks, file sizes can be a problem if you're delivering a lecture that runs too long. And that, I think, has important implications. It makes each topic covered very focused and with a limited presentation. So students who have trouble on a given topic can take their time going through it. And if it's a topic that they already know a lot about, they can skim through it, which is something that, you know, obviously you can't do with a fully in-person presentation. So I think that has some important implications and some advantages.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Bill. Anybody else?
Can I add to Bill's point? It also, by breaking it up into smaller parts, if you find that you go back to you've taken the class and then you go back and you're working on something and you find you're having trouble with an individual thing like regression, how do I select this regression? You can go back to just that module, and if it's on demand, you can rewatch it and go through it as carefully as you want to, versus if we've got this 2 or 3 hour thing that's sitting out there somewhere, you know, you have to sit there and go, okay, I need to poke my way through this. Where's that specific thing that I need? I think it's easier when you have smaller modules for people to come back and focus on the thing that they need at a particular time.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
yeah,
thank
that's
you,
a
Brian.
good point. And even, you know, somebody can do a module, they're not understanding it. Depending on, you know, how things are set up, they may be able to then ask the instructor who pre-recorded it a lot of questions, or, you know, do like an office hour on that specific topic to, you know, get clarified on the topic, which is harder to do, very hard to do, I think, with in-person training. And I was thinking, you know, like for university classes, at least in the US, I think an hour was typically, or just short of an hour, the minimum time. And why is that? Well, if you're going to get a bunch of people together, including the instructor, you don't want to do 10 minutes, you know, and then have them keep coming back 20 times. So whatever advantages there are to doing small chunks, that's something that pre-recorded virtual training has an advantage with.
I'd also,
Okay, thanks.
can I just tag something else? Sorry.
Go for it.
I mean, the other thing is that if there is a technological advance, or if there's a special thing if there's something that happens where you need to change, you can change smaller modules easier to reflect something that's just happened. Like, you know, you have a pandemic and you're going to use a certain type of regressor over and over again, or there's a new technique that you've learned to use during, rather than having to redo your entire thing, you can like sort of focus on the module that seems the most, you know, the most apt for that situation. You can change these things piecemeal versus having to go through and redesign your entire class.
Yeah,
maybe just
to go
quickly
back
adding to the last part. Yeah. So what I think that when we talk about pre-recording, whether just doing it online and then recording or not, is the question of how often will we give the course. So if you're doing it just one time or maybe even 2 times, then I think pre-recording may not be worth it, because it's just, I think, generally speaking, more work to do something pre-recorded, because you're putting more thought into it, because you feel like it's going to last for a longer time. You want to make it a little bit more general and not tailored towards the specific audience, maybe. And so that is just a trivial point that I wanted to add, that whether you want to do pre-recording or not also depends on how often you're going to give this specific course. And as Brian said, maybe something changes in the future, and there's always going to be changes. Then if you do the pre-recording and you have to redo it like virtually every time, then it may not be worth it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. No, according to me, we're up to it's 4 o'clock my time, which is the sort of the end. But we talked a lot about, so I'm going to sort of think, but I'm going to come up with one question, which I think a lot of people have probably got in their minds. So a lot of the discussion is the whole idea about how you actually do things virtual, how it's different, and that's the general discussion. So I really strongly recommend if somebody's thinking about setting up virtual training, you actually look at the background, because as people have said, it's just not recording and stuff. But because this is virtual training in seasonal adjustment, I'm going to ask the question of each of the panelists. You've all built stuff for virtual training. A lot of people asking, can I get it, so to speak, or where's the position to being availability? So I'd like to go through all of you to say, are you open to somebody contacting you and saying, can I use some of your virtual training? So I'll start with Eli, because of course you have it available, obviously the cost. So if you want to talk about your virtual training and how people, whether people can get the stuff from you and under what circumstances. So Eli?
Yes. Catherine Hood Consulting currently only has available a intro to seasonal adjustment course that just covers the basic topics of what seasonal adjustment is. We are currently working on a more in-depth X13 course that will be in beta testing soon. I'm not sure when though. But yes, you can reach out to us. We have our website. I believe it's cchhood.com. And there's information on there about our courses. We have a kind of a sample course that if you want to just see what our course looks like, we have that available for free just to click through. We have the introductory course, which is online now, available for purchase. The prices will be on the website. And we have if you want to get in contact with us about the X13 course for maybe getting on the list for beta testing, that is also open, and you can email. Catherine's emails will be on the website as well for contacting us.
If you get the websites and you find them, just put them in the chat so people can see them.
Yep.
Kathy, what about the stuff that Census Bureau is doing?
Well, so far, aside from sharing with other federal colleagues, we haven't really shared our materials so much. And I don't think that we've yet given an external class in our virtual environment. It is something that I've brought up to my higher ups to talk about collaborating with other agencies or other experts in this field, that we could maybe create together some materials that could be available. And so far we haven't done anything like that. I know Statistics Canada has a nifty 2-minute video on YouTube that just talks about the concepts of seasonal adjustment. And I haven't seen anything beyond that, but it would be nice if we could have some set of very basic materials that we could all share. I think that would be a benefit. And it is something that I have brought up to my managers.
Just for the benefit of the audience, it's something when we were putting the panel discussion, we recognized that one of the advantages of virtual is you can build modules which you can share about, but it would be on the assumption, like any open source stuff, that things that you find you update. I noticed Tucker McElroy, he mentions that James Livesey from Census has some course materials on GitHub. It's in the chat if you actually want to see where that is. What about you, Brian? Your materials in terms of?
At this point, they exist on our internal network. I'm not sure that we are, our materials aren't, well, I don't think they're complete yet. We're doing a bunch of more, we're doing more videos. So I'm not sure that we're in a position to share anything for a while. But I mean, I think we're open to it. It's just, you know, we have to go through the rigmarole of where is this stuff going to be? Where is it going to reside? Is it going to reside on YouTube? Are we going to put it on directly on the website in some sort of video sharing mode? And we really haven't started that discussion yet. I mean, we're open to it, but I mean, we're not at the stage yet where we feel like we can share stuff with other people.
What about you, Daniel?
So we don't have anything recorded that we can share. We are obviously always happy to share slides and ideas. We are happy to give courses, especially for central banks, for obvious reasons. I was trying to find it. I think that a colleague from the statistical department in France is putting stuff on YouTube, actually. But it's as far as I know, in early stages. But yeah, you might want to keep your eyes open for that in the next month and years.
Okay, look, we've gone a bit over our time, so I'm just going to sort of wind things up a bit here. Just reiterate, it's good if everybody could share just on our own personal things. The question is that in the chat group, somebody asked, is there any universities offering seasonal adjustment courses? I know I talk about seasonal adjustment in the time series, but it's only 1 or 2 lectures because you focus on ARIMA. Within Statistics New Zealand, we are developing a course on using seasonal adjustment using R. It's not for setting up production systems, but for, you know, researching in background. Once we've got that, it'll be in Markdown with workshops. I'm happy to make that available to anybody, but watch this space. So I think that's the thing to do is the people in the audience, you've now got some people that you can just contact and say, could you just let me know what stuff you can let me, so I'm on your sort of circulation list when you get to these points. One of the things that I need to stress to people who think, oh, well, you know, the statistical agency, it should be easy enough to make it widely available, is to just remind people is that there's a lot of stuff that we have in our courses, which is how we do it, and it's quite particular. And A, it's not necessarily going to be feasible for you. And B, some of it is stuff that we don't generally want people outside the organization to know because there's various little budgets and figures. So it's not a case of taking what we've got as an agency and then just simply saying we have to actually review it and make sure, because I know my boss would not want me to release any training materials without getting it passed that it's up to standards. So on that, I'd like to thank firstly the audience for coming in. I like the chat. That's really got into all sorts of things there. I strongly recommend, if you haven't been looking at the chat, to go and look at it. I secondly would like to thank our speakers, the Eli from Catherine Hood Consulting, Kathy from Census Bureau, Brian sort of from BLS, Daniel from Statistisches Deutsches Bundesbank, and also all the people putting all of those very good discussions. And last but definitely not least, I'd like to thank Wendy Martinez for basically allowing us to do the whole session, because anybody in an organization will know that trying to do something, yeah, it's just a nightmare with what your IT people will allow you to do and not allow you to do. So on that, I would like to finish this. This is hopefully the start of building a group of people who are doing training in seasonal adjustment to share ideas and that sort of stuff. Again, I remind you, you do virtual. One of the things we haven't covered, which is how do you get the students to interact with each other? Because we all know that one of the advantages with in-person is the students can talk amongst themselves, because it's a lot easier to say to a student, I don't understand this, than to necessarily the leader. But there's a lot there. Thank you very much. And I would like to close the session. Thank you for attending. And you can stop the recording now, Wendy.
Okay.
And I don't know how the recording's going to be circulated, but we'll work out a way.